From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
We're so happy to have you here, and you're in for a real treat today with some music that you're not going to hear that often, especially live. My name is David Plylar. I'm with the Concert Office of the Library of Congress, and it's my distinct pleasure to be here with Maestro Sandro Ivo Bartoli, who will be giving us a program that largely focuses on Bach, but through the lens of Ferruccio Busoni, who is, we're celebrating his 150th birthday this year. So I was thinking maybe we could start with just, maybe you could say a few words about this program and how it came about.
Oh, absolutely. Can you hear me? Is it not? Yes? But first of all, let me say, forgive me for the delay, but after all, I'm Italian. I have to be a little late. It would not be in character. The program, well, in my opinion, I hope in a couple of hours you'll agree with me, it's a beautiful program. It's, in a way, it's a pianist dream, because Mr. Busoni was one of the greatest authors of piano music. In pretty much everything that he did, you can sense a joy of playing the piano. His music is written magnificently for our instrument, and a lot of the inspiration, as David was saying, come from Papa Bach, who was probably the greatest composer of the entire history of music and beyond, really. We have a little bit of an intrusion in the second half of Mr. Liszt, who happens to be, again, another one of my favorite composers, for many reasons, but one of the many reasons is that this music is very multifarious. It encompasses a huge range of emotions, and as a composer that I admire very much, but is not very well known. His name was Gianfrancesco Malipiero. He used to say that without emotion, there is nothing. And certainly this will not be the case this afternoon, I think.
Well, this, so the opening work on the program is maybe one of Busoni's most performed pieces, and it's a transcription of a solo violin work. And it's notable, I think it's good to mention that, but had I not mentioned it and had you had never heard it by chance, you might not have any idea that it originated as a solo violin work. It seems like it's actually fits really naturally just as a piano piece in the way that he adapted it.
Well, Busoni was a bit of a maverick in these things. I mean, in fact, at the turn between the 19th and the 20th century, he became so popular as a transcriber that, you know, he began to actually bother people because he was so imaginative in his way of writing for the piano. Now, he did a lot of transcription for the organ works of Bach. And those also, in his version, become so idiomatic for our instrument that, you know, unless you know the original, you wouldn't guess that the original was written for another instrument, which I believe is a testament to his musical and pianistic genius, absolutely.
No, I agree, and one of the things that I think is good to listen for. How many of you, just by curiosity, how many of you are familiar with the original chaconne for solo violin? It's worth checking out after you're done with this, because one of the things that you'll find is that there's a repeating, basically a bass line and a repeating tune that you'll hear, and Busoni clarifies it throughout the entire piece. And it's one of the ways that he contributes to it, and in addition to just having incredibly imaginative writing.
Right. Well, it's, to me, the first time I heard the chaconne, I was a young kid, really, and it was played by this person who then became a mentor, a pianist named Shura Cherkassky, and the impression he gave me, it was like an old man telling a story to a younger person. And that's perhaps because of this recurring theme of the ground bass, which is fantastic. But then also, you know, of course, I wanted to learn the chaconne, and then I became friends with Cherkassky. That's all another story. But I learned that the origin of the chaconne are from Spain, apparently, and it was an erotic dance, so I fell in love with it immediately, absolutely, all over again.
Well, not sure how to follow that up, but You're going to enjoy it a lot, is I think what. The second piece on the program is this wonderful kind of an amalgamation of Busoni's thought with Bach, and it's basically an interaction. It's like you're watching a meeting of minds between Busoni and Bach through using the art of fugue as the kind of the focal point. What can you say about that piece? I mean, there's so much that you can say about it, but to you as a pianist, especially, how do you approach this kind of a work? That's part transcription, part composition, part lots of other stuff.
Well, I've devoted a lot of my time to the study of Busoni's music and his life and his figure. So, of course, I had to play the Fantasia Contrapuntistica. It's his most important work for solo piano. The underlying theme is that it is the completion of Bach's unfinished work, the Art of Fugue, that Bach left what was essentially a quadruple fugue unfinished after the entrance of the third subject, which is his own name. And very many people in the 1800s suggested possible conclusions, but nobody really did anything with it. But Busoni actually did complete the quadruple fugue. You must bear in mind that Signor Busoni had a very large personality. He was not content with completing the fugue. I mean, he wrote a huge prelude to this quadruple fugue. Then there's a little intermezzo, a set of variations on the themes from the fugue, then a cadenza, and then a fourth fugue. I mean, the work grew to rather monumental proportions. But I think there are two elements to the Fantasia Contrapuntistica that are fundamental. The first is that Busoni said it was a piece compiled for the piano. So it's not really a concert piece in the accepted sense of the word. And the second, and perhaps most important, is not only a meeting of two minds, that were Bach and Signor Busoni, but also is a meeting of two times. Because he manages in this piece to embroider the original Bach material into an early 20th century idiom. And then towards the middle of the composition, Bach is of course left behind and it becomes Busoni. Well, at times it sounds like Scriabin on acid. He went also with the harmonies, he went really crazy, but it's part of the beauty of this very, very important piece. I mean, none other than Dr. Albert Schweitzer, who was to win the Nobel Prize for Peace, but in his own right was a great musicologist and scholar of Bach. He admired very much this work that Busoni had done, and he proclaimed that Busoni found the solution to the riddle of Bach's Last Fugue. It's no mean feat.
I should mention that after this talk before the concert, we have a first edition of the Art of Fugue sadly from 1800. But we have that out, and we have it open to a place where the third fugue subject enters, and that's the B-A-C-H, so B flat A, C, B natural, and that plays a major role in the full piece, as you can see. But there's actually a completion in this one that you should take a look at. But it's shortened and not quite as imaginative as Busoni's. After this, at that point, we'll take a break for intermission. But then we are going to look at Bach through a different lens, and this is we have programmed a piece that's based on a Bach cantata movement, the Weinenklagen Sorgensagen. And there's several pieces. You may be familiar with the variations on a motive from this. But this is actually a prelude that Liszt had composed for the piano. The variations was originally kind of conceived as an organ work. But the prelude is a piano work that the Library of Congress has, and we have it on display, the manuscript for that. But what do you think of performing that piece? What's that been like? I think this is a new piece for you in terms of...
Yes, and I should thank you guys for asking me to do it, because, of course, like most pianists in the early 90s, when Mr. Horowitz's last CD came out, he had recorded this piece, which I didn't know at the time. Oh my God, it's beautiful, I'm going to learn it, And then, of course, you always think, well, Horowitz is playing it, what a little stupid me going to do, learning this piece. And then, of course, Mr. Horowitz suddenly died, and you know, at various times in my life, I thought, oh, well, I should learn the prelude, such a beautiful piece. But somehow never mustered the courage to do it. You know? And then there was always something else to do. And I'm Italian after all, so I never learned it. And then when David mentioned that the Library of Congress had acquired the manuscript, well, of course, there was no escape at that point. But it was, of course, an adventure because it is, again, the work of a genius. It takes 6 or 7 notes from the bass of this cantata, and the prelude is very short, 6 or 7 minutes of music, but it's 20-odd variations on this tiny little melodic cell, and one more beautiful than the other. It's also a very tragic piece. It's very, very pensive. I mean, the title means sighs, tears, sorrow, fear, and so on and so forth. It's a very uplifting kind of thing to start the second.
But it also, I think we probably, I mean, I should say that we thought of this at the very beginning, but it's a nice, it's almost like a mirror of the chaconne in terms of having another structure that's similar but just more compacted.
Much more cohesive. And I think, this is getting a little bit too technical maybe, but in this piece there's a passage where Liszt is actually writing like Bach. It's just a 2-voice. The right hand is playing 1 note at a time, the left hand mirrors this right 1 note at a time. Very unusual for Liszt. But it's only 4 or 5 bars. It could easily be Bach, except perhaps for the harmony, which is also something that Busoni does in the Fantasia Contrapuntistica when he's writing the 4th fugue. There's minute excerpts in which it could have been written by Bach. So this is very much the meeting of 2 minds, and also going back to the beginning, but except now we're at the beginning of the second half.
One thing I wanted to bring up is that you recently recorded a CD that was focused on the Franciscan Liszt, and this is part of what this is part of what the next 2 works are from that. Well, not from that disc, but we're part of that collection of works. And maybe you could tell us a bit about that, because while it's a departure from the Bach theme, and there is still this religious connotation that comes through.
Well, it is not generally known, but Liszt at 16 wanted to become a Catholic priest. He was prevented by his mother, and we should be thankful to his mother, I think, because it was the gain is posterity. But he had this very romantic, life. I mean, it's worth reading a biography of Liszt. He was the first one of the first 2 music superstars. The other was Paganini. But when he was in his 50s, 2 of his 3 children died in the space of 2 years. And understandably, he had a very profound crisis. And after a series of, again, adventurous events, he took the orders of the Franciscan order. He became a Franciscan monk, moved to Rome, to a little monastery in the outskirts of Rome, and began writing religious music. He had been writing for quite a few years. But at that point, he began writing music dedicated to his patron saints, which were St. Francis of Assisi and St. Francis of Paula. The pieces that I'm playing today are perhaps the most famous of this sphere of the Franciscan music of Liszt, and rightly so. I mean, they're religious pieces, but they are very comfortable in the concert hall also. I'm very grateful to Maestro Liszt, actually, because with the Harmonie Poétique Religieuse, which dated from about 10 years earlier, he was trying actively to bridge the gap between the church and the concert hall and the theater. Very successfully, in my opinion. And before coming here to America, I was invited to play at the Sagra Musicale Umbra, which is the world's oldest music festival. But it's devoted to sacred music. So they very rarely have pianists play there. But fortunately, I had this music of Liszt's Franciscan music. So I was able to take part in this very unusual event. And, I wanted to bring a little part of it over to America. This is the American dream for me coming true.
Wow. One thing I should mention about these pieces, and also other pieces that are on that disc that you have, is that he has this they're also transcription. These ones originated as piano pieces, but right afterwards he made versions for orchestra as well, that were, I think, not recorded for another century or so, or not played for another century or so later. But there's this interesting relationship between Liszt's transcription of his own works and trying to give them different voices, as well as just having these original works for solo piano.
Well, I think he knew that he had done something very good with the two legends. He also had quite a nice endorsement. He got a visit from the Pope in this little monastery, and he played the first legend, St. Francis of Assisi preaching to the birds, at which the Pope suggested that Liszt basically concentrated on earthly harmonies in preparation for the timeless ones. So effectively encouraged him to go on in the same way. I would have done that.
Yeah, and we should say that there are a lot of bird sounds in this in that first one that are.
I'm sorry, I've used this word already 2 or 3 times, and maybe I'm inflating it, but when you go and play with genius, odd things happen. I mean, many people, many composers have tried to mimic the song of birds in music. You go to Daquin, Couperin, Italian Bernardo Pasquini. There's a very famous piece. Frescobaldi wrote capriccios on the cuckoos, so on so forth. Right up to the 20th century, when Mr. Messiaen actively went to the woods, recorded on tape the song of birds, and then notated it down in the catalogue. So Liszt is the only one who actually made a correct impression of what a bunch of little birds sounds like. You'll hear it.
And he wasn't limited to 140 characters for his tweets, but I should say. So moving past onto the final work, just to tie it together to back to Busoni and to Bach. This is a piece that I feel is really underheard and not underappreciated for sure. It was started off as an organ work. It's a fantasy and fugue on the chorale Ad nos ad solitarum undam, which was part of a Meyerbeer opera that had just come out in 1849, La Prophète. And Liszt made a series of 3 illustrations that came out first, and then he really got stuck on this theme and decided to make this giant structure for organ that is where we hear a fantasy, a large fantasy, a central kind of adagio, quiet, very beautiful section, followed by a magnificent fugue that's based on the chorale tune. And then Busoni recognized the greatness of this piece and took his expertise in transcription and bringing it to the world of piano music. And have you performed this much? Is it get asked for as?
I performed it a few times. I recorded it even a few years ago. But it's such a huge piece. I think it's about half an hour long. You don't get that many chances of putting it to a program. And unfortunately, also, in order to program, half an hour takes up maybe, usually it's about a third of the length of a piano recital. And promoters, producers, they say in England, they want to put bums on the seats. They need to sell tickets, and so they don't like if you play these long pieces that nobody knows. When they hear it, then usually they like it because it is a masterpiece. And so, but I don't get to play it all that often. I'm delighted that I could do it today.
No, I'm really pleased, especially it ties in so well because one of the things that is also really great about Busoni that most people don't know about him is that he was also, well, I should say many people don't know, maybe you all know this, but is that he was also a good explainer of what he was doing. So he would write about his processes of transcription and really elucidate it so that one could follow that, one could learn from that and do it oneself. Maybe not to the level of a Busoni, but you can see him applying this school of thought that he took to the Bach organ works, applying it to the later Liszt work in this case, and it's just it's a fascinating thing to to study, I think.
Oh, well, it's also a lesson, a huge lesson in piano playing and piano writing. I mean, the piece is magnificent. It ought to rank among the best piano writing ever. The effect that Signor Busoni was able to recreate at the pianoforte, I mean, you'll hear it, but it's a monument to the art of playing the piano, or the craft of playing the piano, rather. This is not very classy of me to say this, but it is very tricky to play. So maybe that's part of the reason why. It's very long.
Yeah.
It's not very well known, and you need to invest a lot of time in learning it, because really Busoni stretches the limit of what a pianist can do in this thing. I think Alan Walker called it a pinnacle in 20th century virtuosity. Got the century wrong, unfortunately. It was 18th century, 19th century.
Well, I think we actually probably need to get going so that you can have some time to get ready for today. But maybe before we go, do we have time for one or two questions?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes.
If anybody has
Shoot
a
away
question.
if you have questions.
We have a mic if you wait. Hang on.
Please.
If we could just-
I was reading your read ahead last night, and I went to Wikipedia to study because I didn't know much about Busoni, and I was reading about he came out with some theories on semitone, and I'm wondering, will we be hearing any of that
No.
today?
No. He was called many times the last Renaissance man. He had many interests. He painted. He was an essayist, composer, great pianist, etc., etc. He devised, for instance, a new system of notation. He did the fantasy from Bach, chromatic fantasy fugue, in this new system that he had invented, where the pianist, it was like a 20th century version of intavolatura, of what they used to do for lute in the Baroque era. He got very fascinated with quarter tones, and he invented the scales that had, I believe, 113 permutation. But this was, sometimes his intellectual side was a little bit overbearing, and took over. None of his innovation, of his most esoteric innovation, none of them took any hold. But if you're interested, there's a book that was published in English also. It's called A Sketch for a New Aesthetic of Music. First edition, I think 1907, and then in German, and then got translated in 1915, 1920 in English. It's only about 70 pages, but it's full of great ideas. One of the most endearing to me is that, defending the art of transcription, he said that when a composer actually writes down a piece of music, he's already committing the act of transcribing an abstract idea into a definite constricting medium. So that's maybe the best key to approach the music of Signor Busoni. And also, we're lucky enough, we have some acoustic recording of Busoni playing, small things, but also not so small. There's one of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, I think it's number 13, that give you a pretty good idea of his truly superhuman capabilities as a musician.
Do we have any other questions? Well, why don't I wanted, before I finish here, I just want to also thank the Italian Cultural Institute of Washington, D.C. for their support of this concert as well. We really appreciate that. And if you could all just join me in thanking Maestro Bartoli for joining us. And we'll
Pleasure, thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.